Life often unfolds in ways that test our assumptions, forcing us to confront the consequences of quick judgments. In today's story, I, an elderly man with more years behind me than ahead, share a tale that reminds us of the power of empathy, the dangers of prejudice, and the resilience of the human spirit. It is a story of an unassuming man, Isaac Reed, whose quiet strength and unwavering professionalism turned a harrowing incident into a lesson for us all. Isaac, a black undercover intelligence officer, boarded a commercial flight on a mission to protect one of the nation's highest-ranking officials. His every move, however, was scrutinized by those whose job was to ensure the very safety he sought to uphold. Misjudged, detained, and humiliated, Isaac's ordeal speaks to broader issues within our society, issues that require courage and compassion to overcome. Before we dive into this powerful narrative, I invite you to join this journey of reflection and transformation. If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing to our channel. Together, let us share messages of understanding and hope. And in the comments below, I encourage you to leave a note of inspiration, such as, "I stand for justice and compassion in every action." Now, let's embark on this unforgettable journey. Isaac Reed had always been a man of quiet resolve. As an undercover intelligence officer, he had spent years mastering the art of blending in. His training taught him to observe without drawing attention, to move through crowded spaces unnoticed, and to act decisively when the moment called for it. But on this particular day, as he boarded Flight 216 bound for Geneva, Switzerland, his every move became a point of suspicion. The mission was straightforward: ensure the safety of Vice President Eleanor Hayes, who was attending a high-stakes international summit. Isaac's role was to remain close but inconspicuous, a shadow in the background, ever watchful. Clad in a tailored suit, his polished demeanor betrayed nothing of the immense responsibility resting on his shoulders. From the moment he stepped into the cabin, Isaac could sense the tension. It wasn't uncommon for him to draw wary glances. His composed demeanor and piercing eyes often set him apart. But this time, the scrutiny felt different. Seated a few rows away, two air marshals exchanged subtle looks, their gazes frequently landing on Isaac. The marshals, both seasoned in their roles, prided themselves on their ability to detect potential threats. Yet, their training had not prepared them to confront their own biases. Isaac's reserved behavior, combined with his appearance, fueled their suspicion. They watched as he avoided small talk, his eyes scanning the cabin with precision. Unaware of his purpose or credentials, they began to form conclusions that would soon spiral out of control. Halfway through the flight, one of the marshals approached Isaac under the guise of routine questioning. Isaac, accustomed to such encounters, presented his official identification, a badge issued by the intelligence agency. But instead of easing their concerns, his credentials seemed to heighten them. The marshal scrutinized the badge, his skepticism apparent. "Why are you traveling with a concealed weapon?" the marshal demanded, his tone curt. Isaac remained calm. "I am on an official mission. My clearance allows for the carrying of this weapon. If you contact my agency," but the marshal cut him off, "we'll handle this." The interaction caught the attention of nearby passengers. Whispers spread like wildfire, and the atmosphere grew tense. Isaac could feel the weight of their stares, the collective judgment forming around him. As the second marshal joined the confrontation, the situation escalated. Isaac's measured responses were met with hostility. When one of the marshals discreetly gestured to another passenger, a flight attendant, to alert the captain, the scene took a dramatic turn. Moments later, Isaac was forcibly restrained. Passengers gasped as the marshals handcuffed him, their voices commanding and authoritative. "Stay seated," one barked, silencing anyone who dared question their actions. Isaac, though composed, felt the sting of indignity. "Please," he implored, "verify my credentials. Contact Vice President Hayes. You're making a mistake." But his words fell on deaf ears. The marshals, driven by their assumptions, chose to act rather than investigate. The incident unfolded as a stark reflection of systemic flaws within security protocols. Studies have long highlighted the prevalence of implicit bias among law enforcement personnel. A 2019 report by the National Institute of Justice revealed that such biases could lead to disproportionate targeting of minorities in high-stress environments. Isaac's ordeal was a testament to these findings. Meanwhile, the cabin descended into chaos. Some passengers expressed unease, while others attempted to capture the unfolding drama on their phones. Isaac remained stoic, his training guiding him through the humiliation. Inside, however, he wrestled with frustration and a deep sense of injustice. For the remainder of the flight, Isaac sat restrained, his mind racing. He replayed the events, questioning how such a blatant disregard for procedure could occur. The marshals avoided his gaze, their expressions betraying a mix of confidence and unease. When the plane finally touched down in Geneva, Isaac's absence did not go unnoticed. Vice President Hayes, informed of the situation, took immediate action. Her voice was calm but firm as she demanded a full account of the incident. "What you've done," she told the marshals, "is not only a failure of protocol but a failure of judgment. This man is not just an agent. He is among the most trusted members of my team." The marshals' faces drained of color as the weight of their error dawned on them. The cabin fell silent as passengers realized the magnitude of the mistake. Isaac, now freed from his restraints, stood tall. His dignity, though tested, remained intact. As he exchanged a glance with the vice president, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This incident, painful as it was, would not define him. Instead, it would serve as a catalyst for change. As the passengers disembarked, whispers of the ordeal spread. Many were moved by Isaac's resilience, while others reflected on their own preconceived notions. The marshals, visibly shaken, extended a reluctant apology. Isaac accepted it with grace, though he knew the journey toward accountability was far from over. What could have ended in despair became an opportunity for introspection, a moment to confront the biases that often go unchecked. Isaac's experience would later spark debates and reforms, but for now, it served as a powerful reminder. Every action, every judgment, carries weight. The next chapter unveils the vice president's determined efforts to hold the marshals accountable and the ripple effects of this incident on both the agency and the public. Stay tuned to discover how a single moment of injustice ignited a broader conversation about equity and fairness. The airport in Geneva was abuzz with activity, but for Isaac Reed, time seemed to slow as he stepped off the plane. The sting of the restraints lingered on his wrists, not from physical pain, but from the indignity of it all. As he adjusted his suit jacket, now slightly wrinkled from the ordeal, Isaac noticed Vice President Eleanor Hayes waiting at the gate, her expression a blend of concern and restrained anger. She strode toward him with the poise of someone who knew the weight of her authority and the urgency of the moment. "Are you all right?" Eleanor asked, her voice low but firm, as though speaking too loudly would shatter whatever composure Isaac had left. "I am, ma'am," Isaac replied, his tone steady, though his eyes betrayed the turmoil within. "But we need to talk." Eleanor nodded, her sharp eyes cutting to the two air marshals being escorted toward her by a security detail. Their faces were pale, their once confident demeanor now replaced by a mixture of fear and guilt. As they reached her, Eleanor held up a hand to stop them from speaking. "Before you say anything, I want you to know that your actions today endangered not only a highly trained officer, but the integrity of our mission. How could you bypass every protocol meant to ensure we act with precision and fairness?" Her voice, though controlled, carried the weight of disappointment that cut deeper than outright anger. One of the marshals, a middle-aged man with a name badge reading "Marshal," stammered out a response. We acted on what we thought was a credible threat, ma'am." His behavior seemed suspicious, and the weapon, Eleanor's sharp gaze, silenced him. Suspicious? A man doing his job, carrying proper identification, became suspicious because you failed to verify his credentials? Tell me, was it his weapon or his appearance that tipped the scales? The silence that followed was deafening. Passengers lingering near the gate whispered among themselves, and several recorded the interaction on their phones. Knowing this confrontation was more than a personal matter, it was emblematic of systemic issues that many had witnessed or endured. Isaac stood slightly behind Eleanor, observing the scene. He felt no desire to gloat or humiliate the marshals further. What he wanted was accountability, not just for this incident, but for the countless others that would follow if no changes were made. Eleanor turned to Isaac, her voice softening. "Let's address this properly. I want you in the briefing room. You deserve to be heard, and I want this matter fully documented before we take action." Isaac nodded. "Thank you, ma'am. And for what it's worth, I don't want their heads on a platter. I want a system that ensures this doesn't happen again to anyone." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "You'll have it." The briefing room at the airport was sterile and utilitarian, its plain walls a stark contrast to the gravity of the discussion unfolding within them. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, Isaac to her left, and the marshals across from them. A security official tasked with documenting the incident tapped away at a laptop, his expression neutral but attentive. Eleanor began by asking Isaac to recount the events from his perspective. He spoke with measured precision, recounting each moment without embellishment. His tone remained professional, but there was no mistaking the underlying frustration in his words. He concluded by saying, "This wasn't just about me. This was about a system that allows snap judgments to override protocol. I've trained for years to protect this nation, and yet, in the eyes of these men, I was reduced to a threat. That cannot continue." The marshals were given a chance to respond. Marshall, who seemed to have taken on the role of spokesperson, admitted to acting hastily. "We were on edge, ma'am. Recent events have heightened our awareness of potential threats, and we let that cloud our judgment. I see now that we should have verified his credentials more thoroughly. I'm sorry." The apology, though genuine, felt insufficient. Eleanor nodded but remained unsmiling. "Acknowledging your mistake is a start, but it's not enough. I'm calling for an immediate review of training procedures for all security personnel under our jurisdiction. We need protocols that don't just emphasize vigilance, but also instill the importance of fairness and accuracy in every action." Isaac added, "And that training needs to include addressing implicit biases. It's not enough to focus on external threats when the very people tasked with protecting us are blinded by their own assumptions." The marshals nodded, their expressions solemn. They had been humbled, but the damage was done. Outside the briefing room, the incident had already begun to make waves. Videos of Isaac being restrained, followed by the confrontation with Eleanor, were circulating online. Public outrage grew as the story gained traction, with hashtags like #verified before acting and #justice for Isaac trending within hours. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of bias and the need for systemic reform. Experts weighed in, citing studies on the prevalence of racial profiling in law enforcement and the detrimental impact it had on public trust. A 2021 study by the Pew Research Center was frequently referenced, highlighting that nearly 60% of Black Americans reported experiencing unfair treatment by law enforcement due to their race. Back in the briefing room, Eleanor concluded the discussion with a promise. "Isaac, you will not only have my full support in this matter, but I also want you to lead a task force dedicated to addressing these issues. Your experience today, as painful as it was, has highlighted weaknesses that need to be corrected. I trust you to help us build a stronger, fairer system." Isaac, though surprised by the offer, accepted it without hesitation. "If it means no one else has to go through this, I'll do it." As the meeting adjourned, Eleanor placed a hand on Isaac's shoulder. "You've handled this with dignity, more than many would have. Let's make sure your resilience leads to meaningful change." As Isaac left the room, he couldn't help but think of the road ahead. The incident had exposed not only the flaws within the system, but also the deeply ingrained prejudices that fueled them. It was a daunting challenge, but Isaac was no stranger to adversity. He resolved to use this experience as a stepping stone, a way to turn personal pain into collective progress. The airport terminal, once filled with tension, now seemed quieter as Isaac walked toward the car, waiting to take him to the summit venue. But the story was far from over. What had started as a single flight would soon ripple across the nation, sparking debates, reforms, and ultimately, hope for a more just future. By the time the news of the incident broke across global headlines, The vice president's team was already in motion. Eleanor Hayes was not one to let injustice pass unnoticed, especially when it involved someone she trusted implicitly. She was aware that her role as a leader meant setting the tone, not just for those under her command, but for the public watching closely. To her, this was not just about righting a wrong against Isaac, but addressing the broader systemic failures that had allowed such an event to occur. Eleanor stood at the press podium that evening, her expression resolute as cameras flashed and reporters murmured. The press conference had been called with little notice, but the gravity of her statement demanded immediacy. Today's events aboard Flight 216 were unacceptable, she began, her voice steady yet charged with emotion. An incident of bias and procedural failure led to the wrongful detention of one of this nation's most dedicated intelligence officers. Isaac Reed is not only a trusted ally, but a symbol of the excellence and diversity that make our country strong. What happened to him highlights issues that extend far beyond this single event. It is a failure of training, of oversight, and ultimately of accountability. Her words echoed across the room, drawing murmurs of agreement and the hurried scratching of pens on notepads. She continued, "This administration will not stand idle while those tasked with protecting our citizens fall short of the standards we demand. Effective immediately, a full investigation into this incident is underway, and reforms to prevent such failures are being prioritized. This is not about assigning blame alone. It is about ensuring that the systems we rely on are rooted in fairness, equity, and professionalism." Isaac watched the conference from his hotel room, his face impassive but his mind racing. The weight of the day still bore down on him, but Eleanor's words sparked a glimmer of hope. She was using her platform not just to defend him, but to push for change, a rare act of leadership in a world often content to look the other way. Meanwhile, the marshals involved in the incident faced an onslaught of scrutiny. Their names and faces were now plastered across social media, with calls for their dismissal growing louder by the hour. But Eleanor was firm in her approach. She had no intention of turning them into scapegoats for a larger problem. Instead, she sought to address the root causes, the implicit biases that clouded judgment and the gaps in training that allowed such biases to manifest in dangerous ways. In a private meeting the next day, Eleanor convened with Isaac, the marshals, and a panel of advisors. It was an emotionally charged room. The marshals, visibly humbled by the ordeal, struggled to meet Isaac's gaze. Eleanor opened the discussion by stating, "This is not about public opinion. This is about accountability and growth. We are here to confront what went wrong, and more importantly, to ensure it doesn't happen again." Isaac spoke first, his voice calm but firm. "I don't doubt that you were doing what you believed was your duty," he said, addressing the marshals. "But belief isn't enough. Actions must be guided by facts, by training, and by a commitment to fairness. What happened to me was not an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a system that too often allows prejudice to dictate outcomes. That system needs to change, and it starts with us." One of the marshals, a younger man named Grayson, finally looked up. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I acted out of fear and assumption. I see now that I let those assumptions override my training, and I put you and everyone on that flight in danger. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to do better." The room was silent for a moment before Eleanor nodded. Acknowledgement is the first step, but it's just that, a step. What we do next is what matters most. The next few weeks saw a whirlwind of activity. Under Eleanor's direction, a comprehensive review of security protocols was launched. Law enforcement agencies and intelligence organizations were brought together to collaborate on new training programs that emphasized de-escalation, cultural awareness, and implicit bias recognition. Isaac, now tasked with leading a special committee on these reforms, threw himself into the work with unwavering determination. The public response to these efforts was mixed. Some applauded the swift action and commitment to reform, while others questioned whether such changes would be enough. Debates erupted on news panels, in community forums, and across social media platforms. Activists highlighted the broader implications of the incident, pointing to the countless cases of bias and discrimination that had not garnered the same level of attention. For many, Isaac's story became a rallying cry, a symbol of resilience in the face of systemic injustice. Throughout it all, Isaac remained focused on the bigger picture. He knew that real change would take time, and he was prepared to endure the challenges ahead. His experiences had taught him the value of patience, of persistence, and of holding on to hope even in the darkest moments. One evening, as he prepared for a meeting with the vice president, Isaac received an unexpected call. It was Grayson, the younger of the two marshals. His voice was tentative but earnest. "Mr. Reed, I wanted to thank you," he said. "Not just for how you handled everything, but for pushing us to do better. I've started taking additional training courses on my own time. I don't want to be the kind of officer who lets fear dictate his actions." Isaac smiled faintly, his respect for the young marshal growing. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong," he replied, "and even more to take steps to improve. Keep at it. Change starts with individuals like you." As the call ended, Isaac felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was long, but moments like these reminded him why the fight was worth it. The work he and Eleanor were doing would not erase the pain of the past, but it could pave the way for a more just and equitable future. The media frenzy surrounding the incident began to die down, but the reforms it inspired continued to gain traction. Isaac's committee proposed sweeping changes to law enforcement and intelligence training, many of which were implemented nationwide. Public awareness campaigns highlighted the importance of addressing implicit bias, sparking conversations in schools, workplaces, and communities. Isaac's journey was far from over, but he took solace in knowing that his ordeal had not been in vain. Through resilience, courage, and the unwavering support of allies like Eleanor, he had turned a moment of injustice into a catalyst for progress. And as he stood before a room of young recruits weeks later, sharing his story, he realized that this was only the beginning. The next chapter reveals how these reforms impacted both individuals and institutions, as well as the personal growth and unexpected alliances forged in the wake of the incident. Stay with us to see how a single act of courage can ripple across a nation, transforming lives and inspiring change. The reforms enacted in the wake of Isaac Reed's ordeal were not just changes on paper. They represented a shift in mindset, a slow but determined push toward a more equitable approach to law enforcement and security. The nation watched closely as these measures were implemented, and Isaac's presence at the forefront of this movement became a symbol of resilience and hope. Yet, progress seldom comes without resistance, and Isaac's path was far from smooth. In his new role as the leader of the Task Force for Accountability and Equity in Security, Isaac found himself balancing two worlds. On one side, he worked with seasoned officials, many of whom resisted the changes with thinly veiled skepticism. On the other, he engaged with communities who saw him as a voice of reason but remained wary of the institutions he now represented. The tension was palpable, but Isaac was undeterred. His first public address as task force leader took place in a packed auditorium in Washington, D.C. The room was filled with a diverse audience: law enforcement officers, activists, journalists, and everyday citizens eager to hear how this new initiative would address the long-standing issues of bias and accountability. Isaac stepped up to the podium, his posture upright and his expression composed. "Good evening," he began, his deep voice carrying across the room. "I stand here today not just as a representative of this task force, but as someone who has lived the experience we are here to address. The incident on Flight 216 was not unique. It was part of a pattern, one that has persisted for far too long. But patterns can be broken, systems can be reformed, and trust can be rebuilt if we are willing to do the work." The room was silent, every eye fixed on him. Isaac continued, "This is not about assigning blame or vilifying individuals. It's about recognizing the flaws in our systems and taking meaningful steps to correct them. Our reforms are designed to ensure that security is rooted in fairness and that our protectors are as committed to justice as they are to vigilance. But these changes will only succeed if we all commit to them, not just in policy but in practice." He paused, scanning the faces before him. Change is never easy, and it will not come overnight. But I believe in the power of unity. I believe that when we hold ourselves and each other accountable, we can create a society where justice is not just an ideal, but a reality. And I invite each of you, whether you wear a badge, carry a sign, or simply want a better world for your children, to join us in this effort. The audience erupted into applause, some standing in a show of support. Among them were two familiar faces, Marshall and Grayson, the air marshals whose actions had sparked this journey. They had come not out of obligation, but to demonstrate their commitment to the cause. Isaac noticed them and gave a small nod, acknowledging their presence without disrupting the moment. As the applause subsided, Isaac introduced the task force's first major initiative, a nationwide training program designed to address implicit bias, improve de-escalation techniques, and foster cultural competency among security professionals. The program, aptly named Unified Vigilance, was met with cautious optimism. Critics argued that such training could not undo years of ingrained prejudice, while supporters hailed it as a necessary step forward. Over the next several months, Unified Vigilance rolled out across the country. Isaac personally visited training sessions, speaking with participants and observing their progress. In one such session, held at a police academy in Chicago, he encountered a young recruit named Elena Martinez. Elena, a Latina woman in her early 20s, had joined the academy with the hope of bridging the gap between law enforcement and her community. During a break, she approached Isaac. "Sir, can I ask you something?" she began, her voice steady but tinged with curiosity. "How do you stay hopeful when it feels like the system is so broken?" Isaac considered her question carefully. "Hope isn't something that comes easily," he admitted. "It's something you choose to hold on to, even when the odds seem stacked against you. For me, it's about the people, the ones who believe in change and are willing to fight for it. People like you, Elena. You're part of the solution, and that gives me hope." Elena smiled, her resolve visibly strengthened. Their conversation would later inspire her to become a vocal advocate for community policing initiatives, further exemplifying the ripple effect of Isaac's efforts. Meanwhile, the reforms began to show tangible results. Incidents of racial profiling and excessive force saw a measurable decline in agencies that had fully embraced unified vigilance. Surveys conducted by the Pew Research Center indicated a gradual increase in public trust toward law enforcement, particularly among marginalized communities. These gains, though modest, were a testament to the power of collective action. Yet, not everyone was ready to embrace the changes. In a high-profile interview, a former law enforcement official dismissed the reforms as idealistic and unrealistic in high-pressure situations. The statement sparked a heated debate, with critics arguing that the reforms placed undue constraints on officers. Isaac, when asked to respond, remained calm but resolute. "Our goal is not to make the job of law enforcement harder," he said during a televised rebuttal. "It is to make it better. Better for the officers, better for the communities they serve, and better for the society we all share." Accountability and vigilance are not mutually exclusive, they are complementary. And if we cannot pursue both, then we are failing everyone. Behind the scenes, Isaac continued to forge unexpected alliances. He collaborated with advocacy groups, academic researchers, and even former critics to refine the training programs and expand their reach. One such alliance was with Dr. Rebecca Yates, a renowned psychologist who specialized in implicit bias. Though initially skeptical of government-led reforms, Rebecca became one of the task force's strongest allies after witnessing Isaac's dedication firsthand. "I've worked on these issues for decades," Rebecca told him during a strategy meeting, "and I've rarely seen someone with your level of influence who truly understands the importance of empathy. That's what sets this initiative apart." Isaac's collaboration with Rebecca led to the integration of cutting-edge psychological research into unified vigilance, making the program more impactful and widely respected. Through it all, Isaac remained humble, often deflecting praise onto his team and the countless individuals who had contributed to the movement. Yet his role as the face of the reforms made him a target for criticism, and he faced his share of backlash. Some accused him of being overly idealistic, while others dismissed his efforts as insufficient. But Isaac, grounded by years of experience and an unwavering belief in the power of unity, pressed on. As the reforms continued to gain momentum, Isaac received an invitation to address the United Nations on the importance of equity and accountability in global security practices. The opportunity marked a significant milestone, not just for him but for the movement he represented. As he stood before an international audience, Isaac reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from the humiliation aboard Flight 216 to the countless hours spent advocating for change. He began his speech with a simple but powerful statement: "Unity is our greatest strength. It is what transforms adversity into progress and turns moments of injustice into movements for change." The ripple effects of Isaac's work were undeniable. Unified vigilance became a model for other nations, inspiring similar programs worldwide. And while the road ahead remained long, Isaac knew that every step forward was a victory. The next chapter delves into the personal sacrifices and triumphs that shaped Isaac's journey, exploring how his unwavering commitment to justice reshaped not only his life, but the lives of countless others. Stay with us to witness the enduring impact of one man's courage and the legacy of a movement born from adversity. The United Nations address marked a pivotal moment, not only for Isaac Reed, but for the global conversation about equity and justice in security practices. As he stood at the podium, addressing leaders, diplomats, and human rights advocates from around the world, Isaac felt the weight of the occasion settle on his shoulders. This was no longer about a single flight or even a single nation. His story had become a symbol of something far larger: the universal struggle against prejudice and the quest for accountability. The principles of justice and fairness are not confined by borders, Isaac began, his voice steady and clear. They are the foundation upon which any stable and ethical society is built. Yet too often, we see these principles compromised by bias, whether implicit or explicit, leading to outcomes that harm individuals and erode public trust. My story is not unique. It is one of countless examples that remind us how far we have yet to go. The audience listened intently as Isaac outlined the reforms undertaken by his task force and the tangible results they had achieved. He spoke of unified vigilance, the collaborative efforts with experts like Dr. Rebecca Yates, and the courageous officers and recruits who had embraced change despite resistance. His words carried a mix of humility and determination, emphasizing that the work was far from finished, but that progress was possible with collective effort. As Isaac concluded, he posed a challenge to the gathered leaders: let us not wait for more tragedies to compel us to act. Let us instead commit to building systems that uphold the dignity of every individual, regardless of their race, gender, or background. Together, we can turn stories of pain into pathways for progress. The room erupted into applause, and Isaac stepped down from the stage, greeted by diplomats who praised his vision and resolve. Among them was a representative from South Africa, who shared a story of similar reforms being implemented in their police force following years of public outcry. "Your work inspires us," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "It reminds us that change, though slow, is always within reach." As the conference progressed, Isaac found himself forging connections with leaders and advocates from across the globe. These interactions laid the groundwork for an international coalition focused on promoting equity in law enforcement and security practices. Though the coalition was in its infancy, its potential to drive meaningful change on a global scale was undeniable. Back home, the ripple effects of Isaac's advocacy continued to grow. News outlets highlighted the international recognition of unified vigilance, sparking renewed interest in the program and its broader implications. Communities that had once viewed law enforcement with skepticism began to see signs of progress, as officers trained under the new protocols demonstrated a commitment to fairness and de-escalation. Yet, not all reactions were positive. Within certain corners of the country, backlash simmered. Critics accused the reforms of being too lenient, arguing that they prioritize sensitivity over security. Some officers resigned in protest, unwilling to adapt to the new standards. Others voiced their dissent through social media, where misinformation and inflammatory rhetoric threatened to undermine the movement's momentum. Isaac faced these challenges head-on, addressing public concerns with his trademark composure. In one particularly contentious town hall meeting, a vocal opponent of the reforms confronted him. "You're tying our hands," the man shouted, his voice echoing through the crowded room. "How are we supposed to protect people if we're constantly second-guessing ourselves?" Isaac met the man's gaze, his tone measured but firm. "No one is asking you to second-guess your instincts," he replied. "What we are asking is that those instincts be informed by training, by empathy, and by a commitment to justice. Protecting people doesn't mean abandoning accountability. In fact, the two go hand in hand. When trust is restored, communities and officers alike are safer." The room fell silent, and though not everyone was convinced, many nodded in agreement. Isaac knew that changing minds would take time, but he remained steadfast in his belief that progress was worth the effort. Amid the challenges, there were moments of profound affirmation. At a ceremony honoring the achievements of the task force, Isaac was approached by a young woman named Ayanna. She introduced herself as the sister of a man who had been a victim of racial profiling years earlier, an incident that had left her family deeply mistrustful of law enforcement. "Seeing what you're doing now, it gives me hope," Ayanna said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's not just about my brother. It's about everyone who's ever felt like they didn't matter. Thank you for making them matter." Her words stayed with Isaac long after the ceremony ended, serving as a reminder of why he had chosen this path despite the obstacles. For every critic, there was someone like Ayanna, a person whose faith in justice had been rekindled by the efforts of a movement dedicated to change. As the months turned into years, the impact of unified vigilance continued to unfold. The program's success inspired similar initiatives in countries as far-flung as Canada, Brazil, and Germany. Isaac frequently traveled to share insights and learn from others, his role evolving into that of a global advocate for equity and security practices. At the same time, his personal life began to regain a sense of balance. The demands of his work had often kept him away from family and friends, but Isaac made a conscious effort to reconnect with those who had supported him through the darkest moments. His relationship with Eleanor Hayes, the vice president who had championed his cause, deepened into a profound friendship rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. One evening, as they sat in her office reflecting on the journey so far, Eleanor turned to Isaac and said, "You've done something extraordinary, you know. You've turned pain into progress, not just for yourself, but for so many others." Isaac smiled, his gaze distant as he considered her words. "It's not just me," he replied. "It's everyone who believed in this, who pushed for it, even when it felt impossible. Change doesn't belong to one person, it belongs to all of us." Eleanor nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Still, someone has to light the spark. And that's what you've done." The conversation lingered in Isaac's mind as he left her office that night. He thought of the countless individuals who had joined the movement, each contributing in their own way. He thought of the obstacles they had faced and the victories they had achieved. And he thought of the road ahead, still long but illuminated by the progress they had already made. Isaac knew that his work was far from over, but as he looked toward the future, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The ripples of his journey had spread far and wide, touching lives and inspiring change in ways he could never have imagined. And for that, he was profoundly grateful. The next chapter reveals the personal sacrifices Isaac endured during his journey, as well as the unforeseen alliances and triumphs that solidified his legacy. Stay with us to uncover the heart and humanity behind one man's mission to transform the world. Years had passed since Isaac Reed's ordeal on Flight 216, but the memory of that day never left him. It wasn't the humiliation or the pain of being restrained that lingered. It was the clarity of purpose that had emerged in its wake. His journey from injustice to advocacy had not only reshaped his career, but also redefined his understanding of leadership. Isaac had learned that true progress required more than policies and procedures. It demanded heart, resilience, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Isaac's work with the Unified Vigilance Program had grown beyond its initial scope. What began as a national effort to reform security protocols had evolved into a global initiative with partnerships spanning continents. But with this growth came new challenges, ones that tested Isaac in ways he hadn't anticipated. Leading such a vast movement meant constant travel, long hours, and relentless scrutiny. It also meant sacrificing moments with family and friends, a trade-off that weighed heavily on him. One evening, as Isaac prepared to board yet another flight, this time to a summit in Tokyo, his phone buzzed with a message from his younger sister, Janine. It was a picture of her 2 children, beaming with excitement as they displayed handmade signs that read, "Uncle Isaac, we're proud of you." The sight brought a rare smile to his face, but it also stirred a pang of guilt. He couldn't remember the last time he had visited them, and the realization hit him hard. As the plane ascended, Isaac found himself reflecting on the sacrifices his work had required. He thought of his parents, who had always encouraged him to pursue justice, but now worried about his relentless pace. He thought of Janine, who had once joked that her kids might only recognize him from television. And he thought of himself, the man who had always believed in the importance of balance, but now struggled to find it in his own life. Despite these struggles, Isaac knew he couldn't abandon the mission. The stakes were too high, and the impact too profound. Every day, he received letters and messages from people whose lives had been touched by his work. There was the young recruit in London who credited Unified Vigilance with giving her the tools to de-escalate a tense encounter. The mother in Atlanta who wrote to thank him for helping rebuild her trust in law enforcement. And the activist in Johannesburg who called him a beacon of hope for marginalized communities worldwide. These stories reminded Isaac of why he had chosen this path. They were proof that change was not only possible, but already happening. Still, he couldn't ignore the toll it was taking on him. During a rare, quiet moment at the summit in Tokyo, Isaac confided in Eleanor Hayes, now the President of the United States. She had remained a steadfast ally and friend, often serving as a sounding board for his concerns. "You've done more than anyone could have asked, Isaac," Eleanor said, her tone both empathetic and firm. "But you're not invincible. If you don't take care of yourself, you won't be able to take care of this mission or the people who depend on you." Isaac nodded, her words hitting home. "It's hard to step back when there's so much at stake," he admitted. "But you're right. I need to find a way to recharge without losing momentum." Eleanor smiled, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've built something extraordinary, Isaac. It's strong enough to continue, even if you take a step back. Trust the people you've inspired. They're ready to carry the torch." Her words stayed with him, prompting Isaac to make a difficult but necessary decision. He announced his intention to transition out of his leadership role within the next year, allowing others to take the helm of Unified Vigilance while he focused on mentoring the next generation of leaders. The announcement was met with mixed emotions. Many expressed gratitude for his contributions, while others worried about the movement's future without him at the forefront. But Isaac remained confident in his decision. He spent the next several months preparing for the transition, identifying promising leaders within the organization and ensuring they were equipped to continue the work. Among them was Elena Martinez, the young recruit he had met during a training session in Chicago. Now a rising star in the field, Elena embodied the values of empathy and accountability that Unified Vigilance stood for. In his final public address as task force leader, Isaac spoke with the same clarity and conviction that had defined his career. "Leadership is not about one person," he said, his voice resonating across the packed auditorium. "It's about creating a foundation strong enough to endure beyond any single individual. Unified Vigilance was never just my mission, it is our mission, and I have every confidence that it will continue to thrive under the guidance of the incredible people who have stepped forward to lead." The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation, their applause a testament to the legacy Isaac had built. As he stepped away from the podium, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. The weight of responsibility had not disappeared, but it was now shared, a burden lightened by the collective strength of the movement. In the months that followed, Isaac found new ways to contribute to the cause. He became a sought-after mentor, sharing his insights and experiences with young leaders who were eager to make a difference. He also reconnected with his family, making up for lost time with Janine and her children, who delighted in having their Uncle Isaac back in their lives. One sunny afternoon, as he watched his niece and nephew play in the backyard, Isaac felt a profound sense of gratitude. His journey had been arduous, marked by challenges and sacrifices, but it had also been deeply rewarding. He had witnessed the power of unity, the resilience of the human spirit, and the transformative potential of empathy and accountability. Though he had stepped back from the front lines, Isaac knew his mission was far from over. The seeds he had planted would continue to grow, nurtured by the dedication of those who believed in the vision he had championed. And as he sat there, surrounded by the laughter of children and the warmth of family, Isaac realized that this, too, was part of the legacy he had worked so hard to build, a legacy of hope, justice, and unwavering belief in the possibility of a better world. The next chapter explores the long-term impact of Isaac's legacy, highlighting the personal stories of those who carried his work forward and the global movement that emerged in his wake. Stay with us to discover how one man's mission to transform the world inspired generations to come. Isaac Reed's decision to step back marked not an end, but a transformation. The movement he had sparked took on a life of its own, evolving as new voices joined the chorus for change. Unified Vigilance, under the leadership of Elena Martinez and a coalition of passionate reformers, became synonymous with equity, professionalism, and accountability in security practices worldwide. Yet, as the organization matured, so too did the challenges it faced. In the years following Isaac's transition, Unified Vigilance expanded its reach, integrating its protocols into private security firms, border control agencies, and international peacekeeping forces. The emphasis on rigorous verification, de-escalation techniques, and implicit bias training became standard in sectors once resistant to change. Elena, now its director, pushed for continuous innovation, often consulting Isaac as a mentor and confidant. "Isaac, we're making progress," she told him during one of their regular conversations, her voice tinged with pride and exhaustion. "But it feels like for every step forward, there's someone trying to pull us back. How did you keep going when it felt like the opposition was everywhere?" Isaac smiled, his tone both knowing and encouraging. "You focus on the wins, Elena, on the people who've been helped, the lives changed, and you remember that every ripple matters, even if it takes time to see the full effect. You've got this." Elena nodded, bolstered by his words, and continued her work with renewed determination. Her efforts paid off when Unified Vigilance achieved a milestone Isaac had long dreamed of. Its protocols became the foundation for a new international treaty on equitable security practices, signed by over 50 nations. The treaty emphasized collaborative training, shared accountability standards, and the protection of marginalized communities, a legacy of Isaac's vision, brought to life on a global scale. Despite these victories, Unified Vigilance faced scrutiny from powerful entities resistant to reform. Critics argued that the emphasis on equity hindered efficiency, while others accused the program of being overly idealistic. In one particularly tense exchange during a televised debate, Elena confronted a prominent opponent, a retired general who dismissed the reforms as impractical. "Elena," the general said, his tone condescending, "what you're proposing might work in a classroom, but out in the field, officers don't have the luxury of second-guessing their instincts." Elena, unshaken, responded with clarity, "General, this isn't about second-guessing. It's about refining instincts so that they align with justice and accountability. We're not asking officers to choose between safety and fairness. We're equipping them to uphold both. And the data speaks for itself. Agencies implementing these protocols have seen a measurable decrease in unnecessary use of force and an increase in public trust. That's not idealism, that's progress." Her response resonated widely, reinforcing the credibility of Unified Vigilance and silencing many detractors. Yet behind the scenes, Elena often sought Isaac's counsel, drawing on his wisdom to navigate the complexities of leadership. Isaac, meanwhile, found new ways to contribute to the movement. He became a prolific writer, penning op-eds and essays that blended personal anecdotes with actionable insights on systemic reform. His first book, The Ripple Effect, A Journey of Justice and Accountability, became a bestseller, praised for its honesty and hopefulness. Readers from all walks of life connected with his story, finding inspiration in his ability to turn adversity into action. Through his writing, Isaac amplified voices that might otherwise have been overlooked. He frequently highlighted the stories of officers, activists, and community leaders working to bridge divides and build trust. One such story was that of Officer Malik Johnson, a veteran cop who had initially resisted unified vigilance, but later became one of its staunchest advocates. Malik's transformation began during a unified vigilance training session led by Isaac himself. Initially skeptical, Malik had questioned the value of implicit bias training, dismissing it as unnecessary, but a role-playing exercise in which he found himself on the receiving end of assumptions based on his appearance forced him to confront his own blind spots. "I always thought I was fair," Malik admitted during a follow-up session. "But that exercise showed me how easy it is to fall into patterns of judgment without even realizing it. It was humbling, but it also made me better at my job." Malik's journey resonated with officers across the country, many of whom saw his story as proof that change was not only possible, but transformative. Under his leadership, his precinct became a model of community engagement, earning accolades for its innovative programs and strong relationships with local residents. As Isaac watched the movement grow, he often reflected on the twists and turns of his own journey. One evening, as he sat in his study reviewing letters from Unified Vigilance participants, he received an email from Grayson, one of the air marshals involved in the Flight 216 incident. "Mr. Reed," the email began, "I've wanted to reach out for years but didn't know how to say this. Your grace and courage during that ordeal changed my life. After everything that happened, I took it upon myself to reevaluate my career and my priorities. I'm now leading bias training programs for air marshals, using unified vigilance as a guide. Thank you for showing me the path to redemption." Isaac read the email twice, his chest tightening with emotion. Grayson's journey was a reminder of the power of second chances and the importance of empathy in fostering growth. He replied with a heartfelt message, encouraging Grayson to continue his work and offering his support in any way he could. As unified vigilance entered its second decade, its impact became undeniable. Reports from participating agencies showed significant declines in incidents of racial profiling and excessive force. Communities that had once viewed law enforcement with suspicion began to rebuild trust, and new generations of officers entered the field with a deeper commitment to equity and accountability. For Isaac, these outcomes were the ultimate validation of his efforts. Yet he remained humble, often redirecting praise to the countless individuals who had embraced the movement and made it their own. "It was never about me," he often said. "It was about us, all of us coming together to create something better." In his later years, Isaac continued to mentor young leaders, write, and advocate for justice. He became a beloved figure, not just for his achievements, but for his unwavering belief in the power of unity and compassion. And though he had stepped back from the spotlight, his influence could be felt in every corner of the movement he had inspired. Isaac's legacy was not confined to policies or programs. It lived in the hearts and minds of those who carried his mission forward. As the ripple effects of his work continued to spread, touching lives and transforming systems, one truth became clear. The world Isaac Reed had envisioned, a world rooted in fairness, empathy, and accountability, was no longer a distant dream. It was becoming a reality. As we reflect on Isaac Reed's extraordinary journey, we are reminded of the profound impact one person's courage and resilience can have on the world. From enduring injustice to leading a global movement for equity and accountability, Isaac's story is a testament to the power of unity, empathy, and determination. If this story inspired you, don't let it end here. Join our community by subscribing to the channel so you never miss more incredible narratives like this one. Together, we can continue to learn, grow, and spark meaningful conversations that lead to positive change. Now it's your turn to share. What did Isaac's journey teach you about perseverance and justice? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and include a message of hope or inspiration for others. For example, I choose to stand for fairness and compassion in all I do. And don't stop here. Check out our other videos filled with powerful stories of transformation and resilience. Together, let's keep spreading messages of hope, justice, and unity. Thank you for being part of this journey, and we'll see you in the next video.